You're broken down and tired of living life on the merry-go-round, and you can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out. Move mountains, we gon' walk it out.
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Rankin Mon Valley Pittsburgh section of the National Council of Negro Women. My name is Delores Dupree, section president, and joining me is our section parliamentarian, Lorraine Penn.
Good evening.
We thank all of you who have participated in our previous programs and hope you will join us again today. You can call us at 412-231-2288, and the number will remain on the screen. Our program today will honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose birthday will be celebrated by the country on Monday, January 21st. This program satisfies one of our national mandates, which is to disseminate information about issues affecting African American women and their families. And it also satisfies one of our national initiatives, which is to champion civil rights and human rights. We now have a tradition of starting programs such as this with a video for our young people. We've had young people call in, so we want to address the program to them also. Now, this clip will give them, as well as the adults watching, a brief overview of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life. Please play that clip.
Let's learn about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was an American preacher, humanitarian, and activist who is best known for his role in the African American civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Dr. King, who was inspired by his faith and the peaceful teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, is considered one of history's greatest champions of nonviolence. He used the power of his words, as well as peaceful demonstrations such as protests, sit-ins, and boycotts, in an effort to achieve equality for all people. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a true American hero. Let's learn more about his life and how he inspired a nation and the world to become more tolerant and accepting of all citizens, regardless of race, class, or gender. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on Tuesday, January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia at 12 p.m. His name at birth was Michael King. His father, also named Michael, changed both their names to Martin Luther in honor of the world-renowned German reformer of the same name. Martin Jr. was a middle child. He had an older sister named Willie Christine King and a younger brother named Alfred Daniel Williams King. Martin Jr. attended Booker T. Washington High School and was so smart he skipped both the 9th and 12th grades. He enrolled in Morehouse College at age 15 without formally graduating from high school. During his final semester at Morehouse College, Martin was ordained as a minister. He also took his first steps towards being an activist by writing a letter to the editor of the Atlanta Constitution. In the letter, he declared that African Americans were entitled to the basic rights and opportunities of American citizens. After graduating from Morehouse, Martin attended Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania from 1948 until 1951. Martin then began his doctoral studies at Boston University. During this time, he began to draw from his education, his faith, and his natural verbal ability to form the foundation for what would become his critical role in the civil rights movement. While in Boston, Martin met and dated Coretta Scott, who was a student at the New England Conservatory of Music. On June 18, 1953, they were married in Alabama, where Coretta's family lived. Martin and Coretta became the parents of 4 children: Yolanda King, Martin Luther King III, Dexter Scott King, and Bernice King. On December 1, 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give her seat to a white person on a crowded bus in Montgomery, Alabama. a city known for its segregated public spaces. That night, Martin met with other activists to plan a citywide protest that would become known as the Montgomery Bus Boycott. The boycott lasted over 380 days. During this time, Martin was arrested and harassed by people who did not want the changes he was fighting to bring about. The boycott, however, was a success. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in transportation was unconstitutional. Martin's role in the boycott transformed him into a national figure and the best-known spokesman of the civil rights movement. In the wake of the boycott victory, civil rights leaders recognized the need for a national organization to better coordinate their efforts. In January of 1957, Martin and roughly 60 other ministers and activists founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC. With Martin as president, the SCLC helped conduct nonviolent protests and demonstrations across the South to promote civil rights reform. A primary focus for the organization was registering African Americans to vote. The SCLC sponsored mass meetings in key Southern cities for that purpose. In 1963, Martin led a coalition of several civil rights groups in a nonviolent campaign aimed at Birmingham, Alabama, which was at that time described as the most segregated city in America. The nation was shocked to see images of young African Americans attacked by police dogs and high-pressure fire hoses displayed on television, newspapers, and magazines. It was during this campaign that Martin wrote his now famous Letter from a Birmingham Jail after being arrested again for his participation in the demonstrations. Later in 1963, Martin was one of the driving forces behind the March for Jobs and Freedom, more commonly known as the March on Washington. On August 28, 1963, over 250,000 people of all ethnicities gathered at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. to demand justice and equality for all people. It was here that Martin made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Delivered from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, this speech inspired the nation and is now considered one of the greatest in American history. Martin was later named Time magazine's Man of the Year. This further cemented his status as the nation's foremost social change leader. In 1964, at 35 years old, Martin became the youngest person ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize. When he found out that he had been selected, he promised to donate the prize money, over $54,000, to help continue the important work of the civil rights movement. He delivered another powerful speech when he accepted his award that was both moving and motivational. Also in 1964, partly due to the March on Washington and Martin's speech, Congress passed the landmark Civil Rights Act. This legislation made it illegal to discriminate against people because of their race. The Jim Crow rules of the South that promoted segregation and the harsh mistreatment of African Americans were now against federal law. This was one of the greatest accomplishments for the civil rights movement. In March of 1965, Martin led a march from Selma to the Capitol building in Montgomery, Alabama, to urge President Lyndon B. Johnson and his administration to pass a law protecting the rights of African American voters. At the conclusion of the march, Martin gave another powerful speech that helped rally more supporters. That same year, Congress went on to pass the Voting Rights Act that eliminated the remaining barriers to voting for African Americans. Prior to this legislation, there were still areas in which African Americans were completely disenfranchised, meaning they did not have the right to vote. Over the next 3 years, Martin's focus shifted from racial discrimination to economic injustice and international peace. He led campaigns in Chicago, Illinois, and spoke strongly against the Vietnam War. Martin's opposition to the war cost him support among white allies, including the president, union leaders, and publishers. Martin and the SCLC also organized the Poor People's Campaign in 1968 in an effort to assemble a multiracial coalition of poor Americans who would advocate for economic change. On April 4th, 1968, Martin was shot while standing on the balcony outside of his hotel room at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. At 7:05 p.m., Martin was pronounced dead at St. Joseph's Hospital. He was 39 years old. Martin was buried in his hometown of Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. changed the course of American history. He worked tirelessly to ensure that all people, regardless of race, religion, or national origin, had equal opportunities and could live their lives without fear of violence and discrimination. Martin is regarded as America's greatest human rights advocate. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed a bill creating a federal holiday honoring Martin. The holiday, observed on the third Monday of January each year, is called Martin Luther King Jr. Day, or MLK Day. In the year 2000, it was officially observed by all 50 states for the first time.
That clip shows what a true American hero Dr. King was. We were all in love with the Black Panther movie and the fictional hero, but Dr. King was real. He was extremely intelligent, a humanitarian, a preacher, an activist, an exceptional orator, and the greatest champion of nonviolence. We sometimes forget how young he was when he became one of the country's greatest leaders. This clip shows him being interviewed at only 32 years of age. It's a pretty long clip, but very interesting, just to see how wise and insightful he was at that young age. If you'd like to comment on anything you are seeing, we invite you to give us a call. Please show that clip.
Dr. King, the most unexpected thing about you, to me, is that for a long time you've been a national leader of your people. You're one of the most influential figures, I suppose, in the United States, and yet you're only 32 years old. Now, did you have any special training for this kind of leadership when you were a boy?
No, I really didn't. I had no idea that I would be catapulted into a position of leadership in the civil rights struggle in the United States. I went through the discipline of early elementary school education and then high school and college and theological training, but never did I realize that I would be in a situation where I would be a leader in what is now known as the civil rights struggle of the United States.
Is your father, who's also a Baptist pastor, as I know, is he a social reformer as well as a minister, or is he less interested in this side of it?
Well, he's quite interested, actually. He has had an actual interest in civil rights across the years. He is a pastor of a large church in Atlanta, Georgia. Incidentally, I'm co-pastor of the church. And he has had a strong interest in civil rights. He has been president of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in Atlanta. And he always stood out in social reform.
Do you think he saw that you would be a leader? And do you think he did, in fact, bring you up in some special way to face these responsibilities?
Well, I think he certainly realized the need for this. And after I decided to enter the ministry, he constantly stressed the need for leadership. And I'm sure that he hoped that I would stand out in this area. Whether he realized that I would do it or not is something else, but he certainly hoped for this.
What sort of home did you have as a child? Was it a strict home, for instance?
Well, I guess it was a relatively strict coming up in a minister's home. I faced the discipline that you would face in the very fervent religious background. However, I don't think it was over strict to the point that I developed any personality conflicts as a result of my early childhood, but it was strict enough, and I think it was strict enough for me to develop certain disciplinary principles as I came up.
Were you a quick starter at your lessons?
Yes, I would say generally I was. Interestingly enough, I didn't start out with an interest to enter the ministry. At first, after finishing high school, I was interested in going into law. and also medicine at one point. And all along, I received fairly good grades. But finally, I decided to enter the ministry and then went on to theological school.
Well, now, when you were still a small boy, before those decisions came along, were you conscious of color discrimination in your own life?
Yes, I became conscious of color discrimination at a relatively early age. I think the first time was when I was about 6 years old. I had some friends who lived, well, they didn't live in front of us, but their parents had a store, 2 white boys, and they were my inseparable playmates for the early years of my life. And I remember when I was about 6, something started happening. When I went over to play with them, they always made excuses. They could not play. They were busy. And finally, I went to my mother with this problem, and she tried to explain to me in the best way she could explain to a child 6 years old. And this was really the first time that I became aware of the racial differences, or really the racial problem. She made it clear to me that this system had a long history, dating back to the time of slavery. She tried to explain the meaning of the system of segregation. But the thing I would always remember is that in the midst of her explanation, she always said to me, you must never feel that you are less than anybody else. You must always feel that you are somebody, and you must feel that you are as good as anybody else. And of course, this came up with me in spite of the fact that I still confronted the system of segregation every day.
Was that a violent conflict in your life? If you really believed your mother, and yet the system around you suggested that this wasn't true, it must have set up some sort of strain.
Yes, I think so. As I look back over those early days, I did have something of an inattention. On the one hand, my mother taught me that I should feel a sense of somebodyness. On the other hand, I had to go out and face a system which stared me in the face every day saying, you are less than, you are not equal to. So this was a real tension within.
Now, out of your own personal experience, the only example you've given me so far is one family where the mother didn't too much care to have you play with her children. What were you really prevented from doing as a child that a white child might have done?
Well, in my days in Atlanta as a child, there was a pretty strict system of segregation. For instance, I could not use the swimming pool, so that for a long, long time I could not go in swimming until the YMCA was built, a Negro YMCA, and they had a swimming pool there. But certainly a Negro child in Atlanta could not go to any public park. I could not go to the so-called white schools. There were separate schools. And I attended a high school in Atlanta, which was the only high school for Negroes in the city. And this was a real problem because in Atlanta there are more than 200,000 Negroes. In many of the stores downtown, to take another example, I could not go to a lunch counter to buy a hamburger, a cup of coffee, or something like that. I could not attend any of the theaters. Only there were 1 or 2 Negro theaters. They were very small, but they did not get the main pictures. If they got them, they were 2 years late or 3 years late. So that by and large, there was a very strict system of segregation, and there was nothing called racial integration at that time in Atlanta.
Now, that's a description of the system. Was anybody actually cruel to you or violent to you because you were colored?
Yes, we did confront some of those problems. I remember as a child seeing problems of police brutality, and this was mainly aimed at Negro children and Negro adults. I can remember also the organization that is known as the Ku Klux Klan. This is an organization that stands on white supremacy, and an organization that in those days even used violent methods to preserve segregation and to keep the Negro in his place, so to speak. Now, I can remember seeing the Klan actually beat Negroes on some of the streets in Atlanta.
But nobody ever beat you personally?
No, I did have one experience, which was a relatively minor experience, but it still lived with me a good deal. When I was about 8 years old, I was in one of the downtown stores of Atlanta, and all of a sudden someone slapped me, and the only thing I heard was somebody saying, "You are that nigger that stepped on my foot." And it turned out to be a white lady. And, of course, I didn't retaliate at any point. I finally went and told my mother what had happened, and she was very upset about it. But at that time, the lady who slapped me had gone, and my mother and I left the store almost immediately.
Can you remember at this distance of time why you didn't respond in any violent way? Was it that you'd already thought of nonviolence, or was it that you just didn't dare as a Negro to take any strong action against a white?
Well, I think probably it was a combination of two things. I hadn't thought of nonviolence at that early age as a system of thought, as a practical technique. I think a great part of it was that I just didn't think I wouldn't dare retaliate or hit back when a white person was involved. And I think some of it was a part of my native structure, so to speak, and that is that I have never been one to hit back too much.
Well, now, that's all, 20 years or so ago, I suppose.
Yes.
But how bad is the complaint today? After all, the United States has changed a lot. The Negro's rights are protected under the law. What exactly, how much has this system changed between then and now?
Well, it has changed a good deal. It is far from what it ought to be, but I can see many, many changes that have taken place over the last few years. For instance, in the same Atlanta, Georgia, which is one of the largest cities in the South, there are some Negro students in formerly all-white schools. Some of the parks are integrated, some of the public parks. Just a few weeks ago, about 177 lunch counters were open to Negroes on a thoroughly integrated basis. I think I could say also that court injustice is not as glaring a reality today as it was 10 years ago. Police brutality has diminished a great deal. So that in Atlanta alone, there are many changes, and when I look over the total situation, I can say the same thing. For instance, when the United States Supreme Court rendered the decision declaring segregated schools unconstitutional in 1954, 17 states and the District of Columbia practiced segregation in the public schools. But today, I would say most of these states have made some move toward integration. Only 3 states are holding out, namely the states of Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina.
Yes.
So that there has been a great change since, say, 1950 or 1945.
Now, I can't help following you up at one point there. You said, I think I'm quoting you more or less verbally correctly, you said that denial of justice was less glaring than it used to be, and that police brutality had, I think your words were, somewhat diminished. Now, it follows from that you're not content that the Negro gets justice in the United States as things are at present, and you're not certain that the police do not victimize him.
Well, yes, I think we have moved on a great deal, but we still face token integration. By token integration, I mean a few Negroes getting justice in a particular situation, but the vast majority still confronting problems of economic insecurity and social isolation. So that while we have moved on, we only have token integration, and the problem now is to move from token integration to overall integration, where it involves more than just a few students in a school, more than just a few lunch counters open, more than gaining justice in the courts in a few situations, but in every situation.
You spoke a moment ago about having been thrust forward into this position of leadership. How exactly did it happen? Why are you at 32 virtually the leader of the Negroes in the United States?
Well, I started out as a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama, which is a state that adjoins the state of Georgia. After I finished my graduate work in Boston, I returned to Montgomery to pastor a church. After I had been in Montgomery about a year, we had the problem there of facing many indignities and injustices on the city buses. Negroes were treated in a very discourteous manner. The bus drivers usually talked to Negro passengers in a very inhuman way. Not only that, if one had visited Montgomery, Alabama prior to 1955, December of 1955, he would have seen Negro passengers actually standing over empty seats. This was because the first 10 seats were reserved for whites only. And even if Negro passengers packed the buses and the other seats, and there were no more seats left other than these seats reserved for whites only, Negro passengers could not sit there. So they had to stand over these seats even if a white passenger was not on the bus. Not only that, there were times when Negro passengers got on the buses at the front and put the fare in the box, and then they had to get off the bus and board by the rear entrance. These were some of the conditions that existed, and on the 5th of December in 1955, a Negro woman was arrested, Mrs. Rosa Parks, for refusing to give up her seat for a boarding white male passenger. Pretty soon after she was arrested, the word got around the Montgomery community, and there was a spontaneous reaction. I think I could say safely that more than 99% of the Negro people of Montgomery rose up with a bit of indignation, a righteous indignation, I would say. And this led to the bus boycott. The Negro citizens decided not to ride the buses until these conditions were changed. They asked me to serve as a spokesman and the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and from this time, I found myself in a leadership position in the civil rights struggle.
And the bus boycott was, of course, a startling success under your leadership.
Yes, we struggled for 381 days, but at the end of that, we returned to thoroughly integrated buses, and they are integrated today in Montgomery.
Now, what does this position of leadership cost you in personal terms? I mean, are you threatened? Do you get anonymous letters? You have had violence, I think, shown to you more than once. Tell us a little what is involved in all that.
Yes, I have been threatened many, many times. There was a time that we received as many as 30 and 40 threatening calls a day. And of course, I received numerous threatening letters. My secretary has come to the point now that she doesn't show me most of these letters, but occasionally I come across them. Within the last few days, I remember receiving a threatening letter. And they say such things as this, you are causing too much trouble in this town, and if you aren't out within 10 days, you and your family will be killed. Now, in Montgomery, our home was bombed twice, and I guess these were the most severe instances of violence that we confronted. But even today, we still confront threats through telephone calls.
Okay, we're going to come back to that video, but we do have a caller, so we're going to take the call. Caller, please say your name and where you're calling from.
Hi, yes, I'm Chanel Simmons. I'm from McKeesport, Pennsylvania.
Hi,
and
Chanel.
I'm a member of the National Council of Negro Women.
Thank you. Thanks for
And
calling.
I'm calling regarding the statement that Martin Luther King just made regarding the threatening letters and things that he's had received. And we have a young lady in the city of Duquesne who is a mayor, first black female mayor for that city. And she is undergoing some of the same things. How far have we really come?
Right.
Have we really come that far? And where are the black men? I have not. They showed her on TV yesterday, but I didn't see one black face except another woman.
Wow.
And I'm surprised because as I was growing up, the black men always surrounded the black community and protected it.
Right.
Today, they have so many complaints about everybody that does anything. And anybody that does anything for the African American community is always a victim. They're not only victimized by the community that doesn't want them there, but they're also victimized by our own community. Martin Luther King gave his life, at a very young age, fighting for us.
Right,
And
we need
what
more
have we
Martin Luther
done?
King
I think
Jr.'s.
we have let him down terribly.
Yeah, I'm wondering what he would say about his dream, you know.
It's the dream. And now our children can't even dream, especially our young black men. They can't even dream. They can't even dream past being 21 or 23. And they feel as though they're lucky if they get to 25. Something is very wrong, and it's not wrong with anybody but us.
Well,
we need to begin to step forward and do something. And that's what I have to say. And if there's anyone that wants to make a comment, I'd like to sit back and just hear the rest of it.
Okay,
well,
Lori.
Thank you, Chanel, for your call. We really appreciate it. I'd just like to say I do appreciate Mad Dads because they do come out and please the community. And it's a community of predominantly black men. Rodman Street Baptist Church also does the street where they go into the community. I think the question should be not how far we've come, but how far society has not come. I think we've done a tremendous job. I think we've become doctors, lawyers, teachers, and we do our very best. But it's a two-way street. We've done all this, but some people's mindsets, they are willfully ignorant. And when that occurs, there's something else that has to happen. So I think we've done very, very well considering the obstacles. And so I just wanted to mention Mad Dads and Rodman Street Baptist Church and other black organizations and men who are out in the community trying to make a big difference and nurture and bring our children and make them feel safe in a very uncertain time and a very uncertain culture. And thank you for the call.
Thank you very much for calling and watching, and continue to watch, please.
And call. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take the next call.
Okay, we have another caller. Caller, can you say your name and where you're calling from?
Yes, good evening. This is Mark, and I'm calling from the north side.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing well, and Miss Lori, it's so nice to see you.
Thank you, Mark. I was just talking about you. Thank you, Mark.
Oh, that is so nice.
Yes,
That's
I was
nice.
hoping you would do a showing of the Soul Train Award since you are a Soul Train hero from Pittsburgh.
We can make it work.
All right.
Well, listen, I just wanted to say that to kind of touch on to the previous caller, which she raises a wonderful question. When you look at the historic footage that you are providing today, and you see a balance of men and women, but you see African-American men stepping up, taking on the leadership role in terms of protection and providing, and being very proud about that. If you fast forward to today, if they're not working hard to feminize what men that are public in terms of the visibility, then they're out to criminalize them. And so it's difficult for our kids to latch on to any kind of real role model. And just a real quick story, just to talk about today. I just watched all of this hype and advertisement about Kevin Hart is considering going on the award show, which he already said he wasn't going to go because of what they brought up on him. Well, I watched the Allen show, and I've never been so embarrassed before in my life to see a prominent African-American man who is dominating the entertainment scene. Actually, the awards people need him more than he needs them.
True.
But he had to apologize 4 or 5 times in 1 hour about something that he tweeted 10 years ago. And so that brings us right back to where we are, is that when we have the men, and when they're high profile, and when they have mass following, black and white, what are they doing to promote the kind of atmosphere that King talked about in some of those videos for us? You know, where Rosa Parks said, no, I'm not getting up. And the word got around. They didn't have internet back then. They just threw word of mouth, said, well, we support you. We're going to quietly just leave the buses alone. When will that ever happen? So there's a lot of things that we can kind of place right beside each other and try to learn off of it. But let's not also forget that to get our men to this position, African-American men, there's been a lot of help out there. It's not just us. We got our own little issues. But there's been a lot of organized efforts to take away that firmness, that strength, just the visualization of seeing a black man being able to stand and to support his family, support his children. They've worked hard to destroy that image. And it's a full-time job somewhere, somehow, for somebody. So what you're showing, and while it just takes you back in history, and you see King there, you rarely see him apologize. He is clean. He speaks really straight to you, and he's telling you what the deal is. And you know that all he needed was to let the people know what direction to go. There weren't tons of people standing out, I'm against you, King, because you didn't do this. Hey, you didn't do this for this group. Hey, you said this 15. There was none of that back then. It was about the survival. So I just called to say thank you so much. It's historic, and I'm enjoying the footage. And the show is timely, too. Of course, we're only talking about a week and a half away before the King celebration. But thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you for calling.
Yes, thank you.
I know when you were talking about Kevin Hart, I appreciated the fact that he said, no, I'm going to bow out. I apologized before, and, you know, I don't need it. Even though it was his dream job, he said he didn't need it. So I'm hoping he doesn't acquiesce and continue to apologize, because he did apologize. And people do grow. People say things that, you know, later on they find out maybe I shouldn't have said that. And so he did apologize and he bowed out. So we'll see what happens on that front.
Yes.
Well, just to add again, Mr. Delores, is that watching the show today, if I were a betting man, my bet is that he will accept, he will bow, he will bend, he will scratch where he doesn't itch, and he will do what they told him to do. And it was so sad, because if you are a comedian and this certain group of folks who are out destroying people based upon something you may have said which they consider homophobic, if they're able to destroy you and now control the public on what you can say and what you can't say about them, we're in a bad place. We are in a very, very bad place.
Because everybody has a skeleton, so, yeah.
Yes, and remember, I don't know what the tweet was, but comedians talk about everybody.
Right.
So you're telling me that your skin is too thin and don't say that hurts us, or we will destroy you, even if it's 10 years ago. We will determine what jokes you can make. We will determine how you participate and how you present yourself. My guess is he will accept it, and they will say, okay, here we are now. Alan had the power to take the most powerful black man on the face of this earth in entertainment, and she brought him to his knees. And if you look hard, he didn't cry, but to me, his eyes was getting a little warm. I said, I'm sorry. I called them. I called you, Alan, and I apologize. And then she repeated again, okay, I think it's okay. You apologize. You were wrong. What?
I didn't see the show, but I think I might have
It's
to
I'm sure
Google
it's on the
it.
internet.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am, I'm sure. Well, listen, thank you so much. I don't
Thank
want to hold
you.
you back. All
Thank
right.
you.
And I'd just like to say that was Mark Brentley who started Bring Your Father to Work Day, which I think was a very good idea. So he is one of the upstanding black men in our community that always steps forward in protecting the family and the image and the responsibility of men and black men. So in my opinion, I do believe black men stand up. I do believe that black men, the attention is not given to the black man who does stand up. So for all of the black men who do stand up all the time, I applaud you and I thank you.
I do too. Looks like we have another call. Caller, please say your name and where you're calling from.
Yes, this is LD. I'm calling from the East End.
Hi, LD.
Hi, LD.
And I just have a few comments. First of all, I'm enjoying the show. You have a lot of useful information you're giving to everyone. And I happen to remember a quote that Dr. King used. And this is something President Trump could use. And that quote is, the time is always right to do what is right. I think he should use that as an example.
Yeah, if he was, a regular kind of guy, he might.
If he could possibly demonstrate that as well.
Thank you.
And just a few other points. I was surprised to find out Dr. King led the civil rights movement for 14 years. But he did so much in 14 years.
Wow, 14 years, okay.
Yeah, because he started in 1954, and he was assassinated in, 1968.
Yes.
Okay.
And he was only 39 when he died.
Right.
Yes.
So if he had lived, he'd be 80 this year. And something something you showed on your show said the boycott lasted in Montgomery, Alabama, for 380 days.
Over a year.
Can you believe that?
Right.
I wonder if we could do that today, say in Pittsburgh, if we wanted to boycott a store. Could we get someone or people to boycott a store for a year?
I'm surprised people aren't even boycotting things like Colin Kaepernick. I mean, all they would have to do is stop watching football, and people walked instead of taking the bus, and people can't stop watching football. So it's hard, to believe that they can, but, we got to keep trying and keep pushing. Right.
Yeah, but when I was thinking about a boycott, I'm talking about if there was a store downtown that was discriminating against African Americans. Could you get African Americans to stop going into that store? I would hope so.
I would hope so, too.
But I wonder if we could.
So. I think so. When that pizza shop brutally beat that young lady, people stopped going in there. Some people still may, just like they did during that time with Dr. King, but a lot of people refrained, and a lot of people patronized the pizza shop that's on Wiley Avenue on the Hill District. So I think people will.
And I know there was a time we attempted to do it when Johnny Gamage got murdered.
Yes.
And we had that boycott downtown because the police department didn't do anything.
Yes.
So it worked for a while.
Yes.
So we have to keep pushing and keep trying and never give up, never give up hope. Because
Right.
Dr. King didn't,
Never.
Right. And I just have a couple more comments. The Lorraine Hotel where Dr. King was killed, the owner's wife of that hotel, she had a heart attack that same day, and she died shortly thereafter.
Wow.
And you wonder if that had something to do with it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, she had a heart attack after she found out that Dr. King had been shot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and just something else I found pretty interesting. There's 3 states, Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas. They celebrate King's birthday, but they also celebrate Robert E. Lee's birthday on the same day.
The same day. Like a slap in the
Same day.
face. I know Arizona was like the last one to celebrate King's birthday, right?
recognize it,
They didn't
yes.
want to do it. They had to get forced to do it.
Right.
So they
Right.
probably did that just because they had to celebrate Dr. King's birthday.
Right.
And just one more comment, just to prove that the struggle still goes on. In Houston, Texas, within the last week, a family was riding in their car, and a white gentleman in a pickup truck rode by and shot into the car and killed a 7-year-old girl
Right. For no reason.
for no reason.
For no reason.
That tells you we still have a long way to go.
It does.
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm enjoying the show, and thank you for letting me make those comments.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for watching and participating and helping us.
Oh,
Yes.
you're welcome. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. And I'd just like to make a comment as well. In Germany, they no longer have statues and remnants of the Holocaust. They tore them down. And America is fighting that, to tear down all the remnants and all the statues and icons of slavery. So to me, it's not that we haven't done as much as we can. Now, white people, other people have to do what they can do to stop this racial and institutional racism. They have to sit at their dinner table, as Mother Teresa and Malcolm X have said. Sit home, talk with your family about the words you use, about the attitude, and about your behavior. And then we can all move forward, because we have moved forward. But it's like you can't clap with one hand, it makes no sound. But together, it has to be two parts. Because when your loved one is shot or killed by the police, it might be a statistic to the country, it might be a percentage to someone else, but it's 100% to that family. And I also like to say that I'm very proud of the men I have in my family who stand up and made me always proud and felt protected. Thank you.
Thank you. You might as well start with that one.
You're not going to continue to move?
Okay.
So many of our leaders have been so young. Dr. King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, and others. All those leaders left us at such a young age. Many of our leaders started out as young leaders. Dr. Dorothy Height, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, Angela Davis, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Congressman John Lewis, and others. Now those who began Black Lives Matter were also young. The next clip shows the comparison of the Black Lives Matter movement and the Dr. King Civil Rights Movement. Please show the next clip.
Black Lives Matter has been a target of criticism from both its opponents and its allies for its confrontational tactics. Demonstrations that started as peaceful protests have descended into violent riots. Activists have stormed stages and stolen microphones. For this, the movement has been called too aggressive, too disruptive, too violent. But 50 years ago, the civil rights movement was criticized for all the same reasons. Though we like to remember it as nonviolent, Martin Luther King's movement used violence, needed violence, to reach its goals. He consciously dramatized police beatings of black activists to shock and embarrass federal officials into taking action. The movement even organized a youth march in Birmingham, Alabama, so children became the targets of police officers' billy clubs and German shepherds. Even Malcolm X criticized that move, but it was successful in drawing national attention to racial injustice. In fact, violence has been critical to every moment of racial justice in U.S. history, from ending slavery to confronting police brutality. Our memories and hagiography remade the civil rights movement into something more palatable. Just 30 years after the March on Washington, 57% of white Americans admitted knowing little or nothing about the event. So the more convenient narrative takes hold. It's easier to think that racial justice can be achieved peacefully, that the movement solved our racial problems and we can simply move on. It sets the scene for dismissing the need for another civil rights movement and for aggression and violence to achieve racial justice. Black Lives Matter activists have insisted this ain't yo mama's civil rights movement, but it has more in common with the civil rights movement than we'd like to remember. The truth is, if you oppose the tactics of Black Lives Matter, you would have abhorred Kings. It fights the same injustices and encounters the same resistance. And just like in the 1960s, aggression, even violence, has been necessary to achieve their goals. I'm Simone Sebastian, Assistant Editor for Outlook.
As that clip showed, many people criticized the Black Lives Matter movement, saying that it was too confrontational. However, there are no murders attributed to the Black Lives Matter movement, and the movement does not advocate violence. Unlike the statement the guy in the White House made, saying that he could go in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and he wouldn't lose any voters, and he actually promotes violence. He told police to rough up those they arrest, and he told his supporters to use violence on his opponents, and he would bail them out. People like him like to deflect their bad behavior and their transgressions on other people. So this next clip shows how things have not changed between Dr. King's civil rights movement and the Black Lives Matter movement. So please show that next clip.
That we've got to come to see now that many of us didn't see too well during the last 10 years. That is that racism
not guilty
is still alive in American society and much more widespread.
Broke his neck after Baltimore police.
A handful of protesters, a handful of criminals and thugs who.
Many in moments of anger, many in moments of deep bitterness, engage in riots. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention.
Mr. Gray's death was a homicide.
The Negro was freed from the bondage of physical slavery.
The athletes marched onto a stage.
But at the same time, the nation refused to give him land to make that freedom meaningful. Freedom without land to cultivate. It was freedom and famine at the same time.
And create jobs for our people.
The
Negro is to be free. He must move down into the inner resources of his own soul and sign with a pen and ink of self-assertive manhood his own Emancipation Proclamation. But I want to get the language right tonight. I want to get the language so right that everybody here will cry out, yes, I'm black, I'm proud of it, I'm black and beautiful.
All right, yeah. He was talking about the same police brutality then that we're talking about today. And of course, if you could change hearts, that would be amazing. And now, due to the availability of social media, we're seeing how some white people who have hatred in their hearts have been calling the police on people for just living while black. For things like the 12-year-old mowing lawns in Cleveland, Ohio, the sophomore at Smith College just eating lunch and reading, the two men sitting in the Oakland, California Starbucks, the 8-year-old selling bottled water, the black man babysitting two white kids, the 9-year-old accused of sexual assault when his book bag brushed against a white woman, a Yale student just resting after studying, a woman waiting in the rain for an Uber in Brooklyn, New York, Bob Marley's granddaughter and her friends leaving an Airbnb in Rialto, California, and just recently a guest at a Portland, Oregon DoubleTree being questioned and put out for no reason. They all had the cops called on them. Now, we know sometimes those calls, when it is involved with a black person, can be deadly. So those people doing that, sometimes you wonder, are they doing that just so that those people can, have some violence taken upon them? Now, Dr. King also knew about that type of thing. And this last clip will show you how he felt like he knew you couldn't change people's hearts, but you have to change the laws to change their behavior. So please show that clip.
I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously. In the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. What is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. And so in a real sense, our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention. Now, in order to develop these massive action programs, we've got to get rid of one or two false notions that continue to exist in our society. One is the notion that only time can solve the problem of racial injustice. I'm sure you've heard this idea. It is the notion almost that is something in the very flow of time that will miraculously cure all evils. And I've heard this over and over again. There are those, and they're often sincere people, who say to Negroes and their allies in the white community that we should slow up and just be nice and patient and continue to pray, and in 100 or 200 years the problem will work itself out, because only time can solve the problem. I think that is an answer to that myth, and it is that time is neutral. It can be used either constructively or destructively. And I'm absolutely convinced that the forces of ill will in our nation, the extreme righteous in our nation, have often used time much more effectively than the forces of goodwill. And it may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words of the bad people and the violent actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time. Somewhere we must come to see that social progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. And so we must help time, and we must realize that the time is always right to do right. And that is that although it may be true that morality cannot be legislated, behavior can be regulated. Even though it may be true that the law cannot change the heart, it can restrain the heartless. Even though it may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, it can restrain him from lynching me, and I think that's pretty important also. Now, I'm convinced that we still need strong civil rights legislation.
You're broken down and tired of living life on the merry-go-round, and you can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out. Move mountains, we gon' walk it out and move mountains. And now